Hello, welcome to Wanderlust Wednesdays. My name is Joost Ouendag, and today I will introduce you to a new itinerary called the Spain and Portugal Discovery. It is an 8-day journey that travels from Lisbon to Barcelona or vice versa, but for the purpose of this presentation, we take you from Lisbon through a few Spanish ports and a surprise to Barcelona. Let me show you what this looks like in a day-to-day. And here you have it, 8 days, 6 guided tours. That doesn't include over 50 optional excursions that you could also book, and 3 countries, not 2. Here we go. You arrive in Lisbon, and the next day you have a full day to explore Portugal's capital. Then you travel to Cádiz, and that is the gateway to one of southern Spain's most beautiful cities, Seville. You then make a little detour and you travel to Tangier in Morocco. And that is a city that is so international because it has been on trade routes for hundreds of years, essentially. And there's a lot of American influence. There is French, Spanish influence. Of course, there is the indigenous Moroccan culture. There is Moorish, if you will, Arab influences. And all of that creates a very, very interesting melting pot of different cultures. Then you travel to Malaga, which is the gateway to Granada, and then to Cartagena, and finally Palma de Mallorca before you end your voyage in Barcelona. Before you travel, you can, of course, book 2 nights in Lisbon as a pre-extension. But before I get ahead of myself, let me show you what all of this looks like on a map. Now, this is a very simple map that shows you the voyage from Lisbon to Barcelona via those ports I've just mentioned. And again, the really interesting tidbit in this new itinerary is that we take you into Morocco. But then, of course, you would imagine that for many of you, probably just traveling across the Atlantic for a mere 8 days might not really do the trick. And the great thing about this itinerary is that it can be a building block for a much longer voyage. You could travel from Lisbon to Rome, for instance, or you could travel from Barcelona to Istanbul, or you could travel all the way from Lisbon to Istanbul. That is what we call the Iberia, the Mediterranean, and Aegean itinerary, and that is 29 days. So you have quite a number of options, and all of this starts in 2026. In the fall of 26, we will have 4 departures, and then in 2027, we will have 12 departures and counting. And now I get to the pre-extension that you can book before you get going in Lisbon, and that's a simple 2-night extension in Lisbon that includes a walking tour to get your bearings, and other than that, a lot of time to catch your breath a little bit, to recover from your jet lag, to have a beautiful meal, and get ready for your ship adventure. Obviously, one of the things that you should do in that day that you have, or in a day and a half or so that you have in Lisbon, is take a tram ride, or, as you saw in the opening slide, take a ride on one of the funiculars. And essentially, a funicular is a tram on a very steep street. That's the easiest way to remember it. Where the streets get even steeper, Lisbon also has some elevators. And all of these things are a great way to experience what it's like to live in a city that officially has 7 hills, but in reality has a few dozen of them. Practicalities first, perhaps, as you look at the Viking Star in front of the Rock of Gibraltar. Climate. What's the weather going to be like? What do I need to pack? And a little bit depends on when you travel. But overall, I would say that you're traveling in a relatively mild climate. It doesn't get really all that cold, except maybe in the latter part of November, and then only in the wee hours of the morning and in the evenings where you might want to bring a sweater. Other than that, you're looking at late 60s, early 70s as far as temperatures are concerned in Fahrenheit, 16 to 21 degrees centigrade. So it's quite pleasant most of the time. A jacket is always a good thing to have with you, a little windbreaker. It doesn't rain an awful lot in the period that we are there. And I think that's what you need to know as far as the climate is concerned. Then let's dive in, shall we? Lisbon is a city of neighborhoods. And on your included excursion, we take you on a coach tour of these various different neighborhoods to get your bearings. I would strongly advise that you take the afternoon to maybe book an optional excursion to one of these neighborhoods or do some exploring of your own. This slide shows you the Plaza Comercio, the Plaza of Commerce, if you will. And of course, this looks out on the Tagus River. And the Tagus River was the gateway to the world for the Portuguese, especially of the 15th and 16th century, when Portugal was a seafaring nation. And much of Lisbon, the feeling that you get has an awful lot to do with that history, with the history of seafaring, with the history of exploration. We'll get to that in a minute. But one of the things that you could do in the evenings in Lisbon is go to a place that plays fado music. And fado music, along with a little dinner, is the soul of Portugal. But I can talk about it, or I can just show you this little video clip.
Fado comes from the Latin word fatum, for fate. Born along the waterfront, in alleys and taverns, the mournful, melancholy songs of Fado speak of life, struggle and passion.
Por ti, chorei, sofri, até fui louca.
The genre originated in Portugal in the early 1800s and quickly took its place as the music of the country.
Não sei se é por ti.
Most Portuguese need but one word to describe fado, saudade, which loosely translates to longing.
Da minha vida.
Fado é uma paixão, né? O fado nasce já com carreira.
I always say you are born with fado. Fado is jealousy. Fado is pain. Fado is love and betrayal. Fado is everything that we feel. Even as a child, when I listened to Amália Rodrigues, our queen of fado, I knew I was destined to follow the same path.
It's been said fado is actually a window into the soul of the Portuguese people. And after one evening, it's easy to understand why. Fado as an art form is held in such high regard, it's part of the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage List. Fado is sung with such passion that even though it's performed in Portuguese, you'll swear you understand every word. Fado will touch you.
Fado é tudo aquilo.
We all have fado inside us. We just need to have the courage to let our souls speak to the world. And because many will, fado will never die.
Come explore Portugal with Viking. Let us share with you this country's fascinating cultural treasures.
This slide gives you a view of Lisbon within the background, the great modern bridge across the Tagus River. If you look very closely to on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the Cathedral of Lisbon, which is actually kind of a stern-looking building. It almost looks like a fortress. The real fortress, the Castelo de San Jorge, is here on the left-hand side on the top. And this is one, in the foreground, is one of the many colorful neighborhoods of Lisbon. On your tour, as I mentioned, you will see quite a few of these neighborhoods, and one of them is the neighborhood of Belém, where you will see this monument, the monument to the explorations. And again, this harks back to the days where Lisbon was, or where Portugal was the preeminent power on the seven seas, where men like Vasco da Gama, who traveled to India, or Ferdinand de Magalhães traveled to around Cape Horn. These were men that put Portugal on the map and maybe put the world on a map for Portugal. The monument to the explorers, and then there is the Tower of Belém, which also has an awful lot to do with the history of the sea. This is a 17th century tower that was at one point a prison. It was used as a customs office. It was used as a lookout and a lighthouse. And today it's just a monument that is viewed by many, many visitors all over the world. Not far from here is a monastery, and that monastery, in my view, is probably one of the most spectacular places in Lisbon, the Jerónimos Monastery, in a style that is very typical Portuguese. And if you look closely to some of the columns that you see, they almost look like they're ropes. And some of the decorations also look like they're ropes. And that is a style that was made very popular by under the rule of Portuguese King Manuel I, and it's called the Manueline style. And obviously, it does look like a rope in some cases, these columns, because it's something that goes back to the maritime traditions. So you find this in the churches, that Portugal at the time was a seafaring nation, and it's quite unique to Portugal. You don't find it anywhere else in Europe. Of course, I could talk about Lisbon a lot longer. We haven't even touched on the food, but we find ourselves in Cadiz. And Cadiz on the Atlantic became Spain's most important port in the 18th century. This was at a time where the Guadalquivir, that flows from Seville down to the coast, had begun to silt up. Up until that time, Seville was the most important trading partner with the Americas, and that's where all the wealth from the colonies arrived. That position was taken over by Cadiz when that silting up occurred, and so from the 18th century on, beautiful buildings were erected in Cadiz. The church that you see here in the foreground dates from that age, the Cathedral of Cadiz. In the background, you see modern Cadiz. Those are tall towers that house people that come to Cadiz primarily for its beaches. We will take you on a guided walk as the included tour to show you what is still there of that glorious 18th century of the city. And then there's also the option of traveling to Seville. One of the most spectacular cities in southern Spain, has had influences from the Moorish era that ended in 1492 with the glorious Reconquista, when the Arab influence was pushed back across the Mediterranean and Spain became a Christian country again. And that glorious period in Seville stretches all the way to what you see here. This is the Plaza de España that was built for the 1918 World Expo that demonstrated that Spain still had an important role to play, especially in Latin America at the time. They had countries from all over Latin America. The US was also there, but primarily countries from Latin America exhibit their riches, their culture in an exhibit. And this is one of the buildings that was left over from that period. Then you will see on your visit, this is really the highlight of Seville, the cathedral with that tower in the background. And that's unusual for a bell tower. And this is because it used to be the minaret of a mosque that was here. And you will explore the entire area around the cathedral because it is such an interesting mix of two cultures, of the Moorish architecture and the Spanish Gothic architecture. It actually has a name in Andalusia. It's called Mudéjar, which speaks to culture, which speaks to influences from both cultures. After we leave Cadiz, we bring you only 17 miles south of the very southern tip of Spain to Tangier, in a new country in Morocco. And Tangier is very much a world apart from Spain, and yet at the same time, there are some similarities. Tangier is also a port city, and that means there are influences from trading partners from all over the world, and you'll find that here. Tangier also has very deep roots. It goes back to a Roman settlement, and tiny little traces of that long 2,000-year history are found everywhere. The next slide that you will see is one of those very typical, somewhat exotic looking little nooks and crannies of the Kasbah, the old fortress. That is one of the older sections of the city. And then on your included excursion, where we give you some snapshots of Tangier, you will also get to experience what the streets are like. And in the streets, you will find people selling clothing, selling hardware, selling everything that you would need to repair a car, but also fruits and vegetables and everything else that you could possibly want or need. Morocco is a place to experience some great food, and one of the optional excursions we offer tells you or introduces you to the tahine, which is a very uh, typical dish that's used to cook food in. It's made out of clay. It's a little difficult to explain. It looks almost a little bit like a volcano. In the lid looks like the sides of a mountain, and then there's a hole in the middle through which hot air escapes. It's a way to cook food without using an awful lot of water, and it's usually cooked on very low heat, which allows all the different herbs and spices to mix with each other, and the flavors are just absolutely fantastic. In this excursion, you get to learn about the cuisine, then you get to cook, and then you get to eat, of course. There are also a lot of things that take a lot of excursions that take you a little further afield. You can only do so much, but I would make this a very full day just to experience as much of Morocco as you possibly can. It's an incredibly hospitable country, very colorful, and just a tad more exotic than, for instance, Portugal and Spain. You're a little bit more familiar with those countries than you would be, I think, with Morocco. Then we will travel back to Spain and find ourselves in Malaga. And this particular image is actually a village that's a little outside of Malaga, but this gives you an idea of what the coast will look like. You could be forgiven for thinking that Malaga is just sea and beaches, but nothing could be further from the truth. As you can see in this slide, there's a Roman amphitheater that is almost 2,000 years old. And in the background is the Alcazaba Palace, a fortress really, that dates back to the 11th century. So here on display, before we even get into the late Middle Ages, there is 1,000 years of history. And Malaga went on to become one of the first major industrialized cities of Spain in the 19th century. So a lot of the public buildings of that era also still stand. And finally, Malaga has as its most famous native son, Pablo Picasso. His birthhouse is a relatively modest building. It has some displays on his life, and it's quite interesting. And you see that on your included excursion as well. Perhaps from Malaga you want to roam a little further afield to Granada. And the Alhambra Palace there is probably the epitome of this mixture of Moorish and later European architectural styles that I spoke about earlier. The Alhambra at any time of day is a spectacular mixture of relatively massive Renaissance buildings and these very elegant pavilions with fountains and little gardens that were left behind by the Moorish civilization that controlled Andalusia for hundreds of years. Our next port is Cartagena. And this is again one of those ports that has a lot to offer on its own, but it also becomes a jump-off point for going a little further afield. As you can see in this picture, these are just some of the 300,000 palm trees in Elche, which is a city in Spain that has become so famous for its botanical pleasures, if you will, that it became a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has a long tradition of planting, of cultivating, and it is an absolutely stunning city because of all the greenery around. It also has a beautiful basilica, but really what's outside is what you travel to Elche for. Murcia is another city that is in the same general region, and I'll get to that in a minute. But first, let me talk about the included excursion in Cartagena itself, because this is, after all, a city that is 23 centuries old. And the Roman ruins, surprisingly, have only been completely uncovered in the 1900s, in the late 1900s. So they were covered for almost 2,000 years. And they have a very modern museum on site that does a great job in explaining the timeline, essentially, of the city. Cartagena comes from a Roman word for New Carthage, and that gives you an idea of how far back in history we are, because it was named after Carthage, the city that was destroyed by the Romans in the trade wars around the Mediterranean so many millennia ago. And I talked about Murcia a minute ago, and one of the things that you can do here is travel overland to Murcia, and at some point you will get across a ridge. There's this beautiful little chapel that you visit on that ridge, and below you can see spread out the city of Murcia. And then in that city you visit these two magnificent buildings. One is the Cathedral of Santa Maria that has a Baroque facade but a Gothic interior, and it's one of the prettiest churches, I think, in all of Spain. And then you also visit the casino, and you see the ballroom of the casino here on the right. Then the next day, or your next port, is Palma de Mallorca. And here again, this is known in Europe in particular. Mallorca is known as just a place where people go to lay in the sun. But again, this is a city that has hundreds of years of history. As an island, it was crucial for trade, not just in the Mediterranean, but also beyond. And that made it quite rich, and that made the architecture very colorful and very historically interesting. Your included tour in Mallorca, in Palma de Mallorca, includes this magnificent edifice, the Belver Castle, from which you have a beautiful view over the surrounding countryside and the city. And as an optional excursion, you can travel along the Cornisas, the Corniche, a road along the coast, to reach La Granja Manor House. And there you will meet the local family who's owned that house for generations. And they will serve you local wine, local cheese, fig bread, and a specialty of the area, the buñuelos, which are a kind of donut. And this is something that we call privileged access. This is a fairly exclusive arrangement that we have with this particular family that is not available to the general public. And then finally, at the end of our journey, we make it all the way to Barcelona. And this is a view of Paracuel overlooking the city. Obviously, you don't want to end in Barcelona, so I would highly recommend that you either book an extra 2 nights where you can largely just explore on your own. There's a small tour included, but overall, you can maximize your free time. And one of the things that you must do while you're in Barcelona is simply eat. And for that, we have a little video.
In Barcelona, there's just one word you need to know when you're hungry. Tapas. Invented by the Spanish long ago, tapas are plentiful here, and tapas bars are a perfect spot to sample Spanish cuisine.
So what does the word tapas actually mean?
A long time ago, the people that was in the beach, they drink a wine or beer or this kind of gazpacho, and then they take some bread and then they cover to try to put in anything inside of the drink.
The original tapas used to be free and always included salty meats, which just happened to encourage the bar patrons to buy more liquor. Today, there are an abundance of choices.
So this is the most typical tapas, is it?
Yeah, this is one of the most typical tapas. The name is tortilla de patatas. This is the real potatoes omelette. Put some garlic inside, salt, and then we cook with love, you know.
Tapas are unusual in that they're always served in small portions, which makes them perfect for sampling and sharing.
One thing is very important is the tomato bread, tomato.
And this is very typical Barcelona, right?
Yes. This is to recover the bread of the day before, you know.
Yes.
We toss the bread and then we put the part inside of the tomato.
So it's a day-old bread.
Yeah, this is the
Leftover
way.
bread.
Yeah.
And then okay.
Yeah, and then we put the tomato, okay.
And what do you call this?
Pan con tomate.
Pan con tomate. It's like
Okay.
a bruschetta, but
Yeah.
with less tomato.
Yes. And then we beat a bit of olive oil and we with salt, okay? Okay, now we prepare for you also fried small fishes.
And so those are small
Okay,
fish. They are
really
very small fish.
fishes, you know. This is like yanqueta or
Like
chanquete.
little boquerones.
The boquerones is bigger one. It's the sardinas family.
They taste delicious.
Yeah, they taste delicious.
And then you serve them with
And
a
then you
fried
serve
egg.
it with the egg, excellent egg with garlic, okay?
And is that a very typical thing to do as well? Put
Yeah.
egg on top of something.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is huevos con yanqueta. Then we put the nice
Egg.
flour for you.
Over the centuries, tapas have incorporated many outside influences, including those of the Romans, the Moors, and it seems even the Vikings.
This is the codfish.
From Norway.
Maybe yes. Here the name is alayauna. We fry it with the pepper, red pepper. After that we make a sauce with the garlic and put in the top.
So bacalao is always with the codfish that's been salted and dried
Yeah.
and then rehydrated.
Yes. Okay, we continue with small squid.
Calamares.
Yeah, the real small ones. Chipirones.
Yes, chipirones.
Yeah.
And you often have them fried, right?
Yes.
Yes.
We fry it and then we cook. And then also by the other side we make, you know.
So these are the chipirones.
Yeah, these are the chipirones.
But they are marinated?
We salt. We
Salt.
fry it and with olive oil and with salt. And then we put egg poché.
Poached egg.
Okay, also with salt with the chipirones, okay? It's real and nice and
Beautiful,
the taste is
yeah,
excellent.
yeah.
And then you put the egg and then in the top I will make some red pepper, okay?
And what do you call this dish?
That is the chipirones with trompeta de la muerte.
And again,
Some
the olive oil.
like, you know,
yeah.
The Spanish love their tapas bars, and there's something really fun and relaxing about eating this way.
Okay, now we make the patatas bravas, the braised potatoes, because
Braised
it's very
potatoes.
strong, the sauce that we put there.
Okay, so there are patatas.
Now we put the spicy sauce in top.
I see patatas bravas everywhere on menus in Spain.
Really it's a very typical plate. Also we make some garlic in top.
This is a little bit like French fries with mayonnaise.
Yeah, with
This
mayonnaise.
is a sophisticated
more
French fries with mayonnaise.
We put in the top of the garlic, okay?
Yeah, braised
And then you give
potatoes.
sauce. Okay.
Very nice.
One of the best things in Barcelona that is the paella.
A
Okay,
pequeña
and then we
paella,
make this
paella.
in a small portion. Also you can share.
And I know the little secret about paella.
Okay.
The bottom bit is the best.
The name is sucarrat.
Sucarat.
Yeah,
so the bottom
real,
of the,
the
pan.
bottom pan of the size,
Yeah.
it's excellent. And now the end I make some typical from Catalonia, this is the crema catalana. We make it with cream, like this, with vanilla, sugar, milk. And we put the sugar in top.
Yeah. I knew there was a flame involved somehow. Very nice. So here we have about the number of
Yeah.
dishes that
Yeah,
two
we can
people
do it
would
if you
eat.
want 10 more.
Tapas are a delightful taste of Spanish cuisine you really should try.
Salud.
Salud, thank you for coming. Thank you.
I hope you'll explore more of Barcelona's food culture and traditions.
Another way to get more out of the Iberian Peninsula is an extension package to Madrid. This is fully guided and you get a little bit more sightseeing included. This doesn't allow you as much free time. It does have a fairly decent amount of it, but much of it is guided. You travel by train to Madrid to see the main highlights there, to get a glimpse of what's in the Prado. You can't visit it all in one day, let alone in one morning or in a few hours, but you will get a good glimpse, you will get a good overview, and you will get an insight in the entire Spanish capital. And that concludes this episode of Wanderlust Wednesdays of our Spain and Portugal Discovery. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to welcoming you on board.